Picture a room about the size of a modern double bedroom. Low ceiling, close enough that a tall man grazes it with his cap. Walls black from years of smoke. Floor covered with rushes that were green once and are now a damp, crushed, faintly decaying brown. In the centre of that room, a fire. Not in a fireplace, not against a wall with a chimney above it. Just a fire, burning in a shallow pit dug into the earth floor, smoke rising toward a hole cut in the thatch above, though the smoke is making its own decisions tonight and most of it is staying right here with you. Now add 8 people sleeping in this room. Add the smell of tallow candles guttering in iron holders on the walls. Animal fat rendered and burned, giving off a faint, meaty sweetness that coats the back of your throat before you've even fully woken up. Add the sound of someone coughing. Someone always coughing in a room like this, at this time of year, in this city. Add cold that comes in through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls, under the door, through the thatch overhead. Cold that doesn't rush at you. Cold that seeps. The particular patient cold of pre-dawn hours in a stone and timber house that has given up pretending to be warm. Add the knowledge, the quiet, ever-present knowledge, that somewhere in this city 3 men were burned alive last Tuesday. That's London in 1555. That's your room. And this is what it actually felt like to spend the night there. Picture the Thames on a September evening, going copper and bronze in the last of the light, the great grey bulk of the city rising from its north bank, the steeples and towers and the endless jumble of timber-framed houses leaning over narrow streets, and rising above all of it, the old spire of St. Paul's Cathedral, the tallest building in England, visible from every part of the city and from far out into the surrounding fields. There are perhaps 80,000 people in this city. 80,000 people burning wood and coal and peat and tallow in fireplaces and hearths and braziers, and the smoke from all of them hangs over London every morning like a low, dirty cloud. You can smell London before you see it, if the wind is right. You can smell it 5 miles away. A place where you might hear the Queen's heralds announcing a new round of burnings at Smithfield, and then walk 10 steps and buy a pie from a woman who has been selling pies from the same corner for 40 years and doesn't look up from her work. A place where a man can be rich enough to have carpets on his floors and poor enough to share his bed with the family pig within the same street. A city of contrasts so violent they stop making sense after a while. You just absorb them, the way you absorb the smoke, into your lungs, into your hair, into your skin. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists peer in at the pretty Tudor buildings from outside. We're inside, 1 room, 1 night. Everything you would have smelled and heard and endured from the time the sun went down to the time it came up again. I make these history episodes, and I genuinely don't know if you're listening because you want to fall asleep, or because you want to understand what it was like to be alive in a time when nights were genuinely, profoundly, almost incomprehensibly dark. Either answer is fine. Both are honest. Subscribe if you haven't already. Get comfortable. Pull whatever you're sleeping under a little tighter. Here we go. Your name is Meg. Margaret Brewer, if you're being formal about it, which almost nobody ever is. You're 15 years old and you've been in London for 4 months, and in those 4 months you have learned that London is nothing like anyone told you it would be, and everything like anyone warned you it would be, both at the same time. You came from a village called Wickham Market in Suffolk, about 90 miles northeast of London, which in 1555 is a journey of 3 to 4 days on foot if the roads are dry, and considerably longer if they're not. You came with your older brother Thomas, who got a position as a journeyman carpenter in Suffolk. and with a letter from your parish priest to a merchant on Cheapside named Master Henry Aldgate, who your priest knew from somewhere, you were never entirely clear on the details, and who needed a girl to help in the kitchen and with the laundering and the sweeping and any other task Dame Alice Aldgate, his wife, saw fit to give you. That was June. The roads were dry. The journey took 3 days. You were not prepared for London. Nobody is. You know that now. You've watched other new arrivals walking the streets with that particular expression. Head up too high, eyes too wide, feet too uncertain, like a horse in a market where it doesn't know the ground. Looking at everything at once and understanding none of it. That was you in June. It probably still is sometimes when you catch yourself standing too long in the middle of Cheapside watching a sedan chair go by and nearly getting knocked into the gutter by a dray cart. The city is loud in a way that the word loud cannot quite capture. It's not just noise, it's layers of noise, each one sitting on top of the others, all of them pressing in from every direction at once. The creak and rattle of cartwheels on cobbles, the shouts of vendors, the bells of a dozen churches all marking the hours slightly out of sync with each other, the bark of dogs, the squeal of pigs, the murmur of thousands of conversations happening at once in every language you've ever heard and several you haven't. You learn to sleep through it after about 2 weeks. The silence of the countryside, which you'd never thought about before because it was just the way things were, now felt like something physical that had been taken from you, like a blanket pulled off in the night. But that's by day. At night is different. At night is what we're here for. The household of Master Henry Aldgate occupies a 4-story timber-framed building on Cheapside, the great commercial street that runs east-west through the heart of London. The ground floor is the shop where Master Aldgate sells broadcloth and woolen goods. Above that, the hall and parlour where the family eats and spends its waking hours. Above that, the master's sleeping chamber and the chambers for the 2 older children. And at the top, under the eaves, the servants' room. Your room. There are 5 of you who sleep there. Yourself. Joan, the cook, a woman of 40-odd with forearms like a drayman and a tongue like a whip, but genuine kindness underneath if you know where to look. Little Alice, who is 11, and Master Aldgate's youngest child, and who has not yet been moved into a proper chamber because there isn't one, and 2 men, Robert the prentice boy and old Walter who runs errands and minds the shop in the slow hours. The 5 of you share this room because that's what you do. Privacy is not something people at your level of the household have. It's not considered something you'd need. The room measures perhaps 15 feet by 12. The floor is bare boards, not earth like the houses you knew in Suffolk. London houses of this quality have proper floors. But the boards are rough and full of splinters, and there are gaps between them that the wind finds at night. Cold fingers of air coming up through the gaps when the weather turns. There are 2 beds, technically. One is a proper bed frame with a straw mattress, which Joan sleeps on because she's the highest-ranking servant and has earned it after 20 years of London service. The other is more of a shelf with a blanket that Robert and Walter share. You and little Alice sleep on a pallet on the floor, a cloth bag stuffed with straw, which you fold up during the day and unfold at night. It's not nothing. People in London sleep on worse. People in London sleep on no pallet at all, directly on the boards, with coats as blankets and their own arms as pillows. You have a pallet and a blanket and someone warm to sleep beside. You've learned to count this. The ceiling is low enough that Joan, who is not a tall woman, has to be careful when she stands up too quickly after a headache. There is one small window, set into the gable end with wooden shutters that close against the cold. There is no glass. Glass in a servant's room would be an absurd extravagance in 1555, a thing so unthinkable that even suggesting it would mark you as someone who doesn't understand how the world works. When the shutters are open, there is light and air and the noise of the street below. When they're closed, there is a darkness so complete that it takes your eyes several minutes to adjust to anything at all. And always, there is smoke. The smoke in a Tudor house is something that has to be explained carefully, because it's easy to think of it as a minor inconvenience and not understand that it is actually a defining feature of life, not a background detail, a constant, physical, unavoidable fact. In 1555, proper chimneys are not universal. They exist. In the better houses, in the houses of wealthy merchants and gentlemen, chimneys have been the normal thing for a generation or more. But in the houses of ordinary working people, in the poorer tenements, in the countryside hovels Meg came from, in the shared lodgings and workshops and alehouses of much of London, a chimney is still a luxury, still something that marks a certain level of prosperity. Master Aldgate's house has a chimney. This is important. He's a successful merchant, a member of the Merchant Tailors' Company, a man of substance and connection. His house has a proper fireplace in the hall, a proper fireplace in the kitchen, a brazier in his sleeping chamber. The smoke from these fires goes up through a chimney and out through the roof, in theory. In practice, chimneys in 1555 are not the efficient smoke evacuation systems of later centuries. They are narrow. They are often poorly positioned relative to the prevailing wind. When the wind comes from a certain direction, it pushes back down the chimney and fills the room with smoke instead of drawing it out. When the flue gets coated with soot, which happens regularly because nobody's cleaning it regularly enough, the draw worsens. When it rains heavily, the smoke has nowhere to go and just billows backward into the hall. And the servants' room doesn't have a chimney at all. There is a small brazier, an iron basket on legs, about the size of a large cooking pot, that sits in the middle of the floor and burns wood or charcoal through the coldest months. Its smoke has nowhere to go except up to the ceiling and then, gradually out through gaps in the thatch and through the shutter cracks and through any other avenue it can find. Which means that in winter, the room holds a permanent layer of smoke from about 4 feet off the floor upward, a horizontal boundary between breathable air below and eye-watering, lung-scraping air above. You learn quickly not to stand up too fast. But smoke is not just the brazier. Smoke is everything. The tallow candles that provide your light after dark give off a thin, persistent smoke that smells of rendered fat, specifically of mutton fat, because mutton tallow makes the cheapest candles, and cheap is what you buy when you're a servant in an attic room. The rushes on the floors downstairs, when they get damp, which they always do, this is London, damp is the default state of things, give off a low, vegetable decay smell that isn't exactly smoke, but isn't exactly not smoke either. A kind of organic murk that sits in the air and in your clothes. And underneath all of that, wood smoke from the kitchen fire, which burns more or less continuously, because Dame Alice requires a fire in the kitchen at all hours. Wood smoke in London in 1555 is not the clean, sharp campfire smell you might imagine. London burns green wood. London burns wood that's been stored in damp cellars. London burns wood mixed with coal in the better houses, mixed with peat in the poorer ones, mixed with whatever came cheapest at the wood merchants that week. The smoke from these fires is thick and brown and particulate, in a way that clean-burning dry wood is not. It stains walls. It stains clothing. It stains skin. You've been in London 4 months. Your hair, which was pale brown when you arrived, is now a darker, slightly greyer shade of the same colour. This will not wash out entirely until the next time you're away from the city for more than a few days. You don't know that yet. You just think your hair has gotten darker. This is the world of the room. This is what you breathe every night. The day in the Aldgate household ends in stages, not all at once. The shop closes at dusk, or rather, when the light drops below the point where Master Aldgate's prentice boys can see to sort cloth by colour and quality. In September this is around 5 in the evening, though the precise time varies by how cloudy the sky is. Before there are proper street lamps, before there are gas lights or any kind of public illumination, the end of usable daylight is the end of the working day for nearly everyone. You can't work by candlelight what you can do by day, and candles are expensive enough to be rationed. The family eats supper. This happens in the hall, at the large trestle table, with Master Aldgate at the head, and Dame Alice beside him, and the children on the bench, and the 2 senior prentice boys at the far end. You eat separately in the kitchen, with Joan and Robert and Walter, after you've served the family and cleared the dishes and brought the food from the kitchen and done the dozen small tasks that make a meal happen. By the time you sit down to eat, the food is often slightly cold, and there's usually less of it than there would have been if you'd eaten first. This is the order of things. You're at the bottom. You eat what's left. It's not cruelty exactly. It's just how it works. Dame Alice is not an unkind woman. She sees you, which is more than can be said for some mistresses in London households where servants exist as functional presences rather than human ones. She asks if you're well. She sometimes saves you back the better portion of something when there's been a good dinner. A bit of extra pie crust, a bone with meat still on it. She doesn't see you as a person of much consequence, but she sees you as a person, which is not nothing. But you eat cold food, and you eat it in the kitchen, and then you clean the kitchen, and then you bank the main fire for the night, and then you check that the shutters on the ground floor are properly closed, and the bar is across the shop door, and then, if there's nothing else Dame Alice needs, you can go upstairs. This is usually around 8 o'clock in the evening, sometimes 9. In summer it was later because there was more to do, and the light lasted longer and everyone moved later. In winter it will be earlier because the cold makes everything hurry toward bed, toward warmth, toward the simple animal mercy of lying down. 8 o'clock. The city outside is still alive. The taverns are open, the night soil men are starting their rounds, the watchmen are doing their first patrols. But for you, for a 15-year-old kitchen girl, the day is over. You take a tallow candle in a clay holder from the shelf in the kitchen. This is your candle for the night, the one allowed per person per evening. If you burn it down before morning, that's your problem. Tallow candles in 1555 are not a luxury, but they're not exactly free either, and Dame Alice counts them. You've learned this. The previous girl apparently was less careful, and now there is a small atmosphere of candle accountability in this household that everyone navigates carefully. The stairs up to the servants' room are steep and narrow, turning twice through the house. In daylight they're manageable. In candlelight with a small flame guttering in the draught from the stair, they're treacherous. You put one hand on the wall to steady yourself, feeling the cold plaster under your fingers, and climb carefully, your candle making the shadows jerk and lunge around you. The plaster is slightly rough under your palm, gritty with the texture of a lime wash, cool and solid. The servants' room is dim when you arrive. Joan is already here, sitting on her bed, taking the pins from her hair. She wears her hair up in the day, a cap and pins and a wimple, and takes it down at night into a grey-brown braid that reaches her waist. She does this automatically without looking, her fingers finding each pin by touch after 20 years of the same nightly routine. Little Alice is curled on the pallet with her knees drawn up, already half asleep. She sleeps like a hedgehog, compact and complete. Robert and Walter haven't come up yet. They're still somewhere in the house, finishing their evening tasks. You set your candle down on the small shelf beside the door. Close it properly, Joan says without looking up. The draft last night woke me 3 times. You close the door, the latch drops, the room settles. Now here is what you need to understand about darkness in 1555. It's not the darkness you know. If you live in a modern city and your power goes out, there's still ambient light. The sky has its own glow from surrounding communities, from reflected light, from whatever source. Even in a rural house today, even on the darkest night, the eyes adjust and find something. Moonlight, starlight, the faint ghost of a neighbour's window. The darkness of a pre-industrial room at night is different in kind. It is not lesser light, it is the absence of light. When your one tallow candle burns down, when the shutters are closed against the September night, when there is no fire in the brazier because it's still early autumn and not yet cold enough to justify the charcoal, the room is black. Not dark, black. The kind of black that presses against your open eyes and gives them nothing to work with. It takes 3 or 4 minutes for your eyes to adjust to anything at all. Then the faint pale rectangle of the shutter might become visible if the moon is up outside. The shapes of the room, Joan's bed, the outlines of sleeping figures, the humped shape of the cloth bag where you keep your things, resolve slowly out of the blackness like objects surfacing from very deep water. You can't read in it. You can't work in it. You can barely navigate in it. You keep your hand on the wall when you need to move at night. You count your steps. You remember exactly where the bucket is, where Joan's bed frame sticks out that extra 2 inches on the left side, where the rough edge of the floorboard that catches bare toes in the dark lives. This is not an exaggeration. This is practical navigation. You learn the room by memory because you have to. Little Alice murmurs something in her sleep. You can't see her, but you know she's there from the sound. You unfold your end of the pallet. The straw inside makes a rustling, settling sound. A particular sound. The sound of your bed, which is different from any other rustling. You kick off your shoes, simple leather things with the leather soles that have been repaired twice since you got them, the toes just beginning to curl upward from the damp and sit on the edge of the pallet. The straw gives under you. You don't undress to sleep. Not entirely. In a room with 5 people in it, you sleep in your shift and your stockings, and that's that. Modesty demands it. Cold demands it too, if we're honest. You fold your outer dress and apron and coif and set them on the floor beside you where you can find them in the morning without making too much noise. Then you lie down. The straw crackles. The blanket is rough wool that smells of the sheep it came from. Just a little. Even now, even years since it was made, that particular lanolin and animal smell, faint and warm under the smoke, you pull it up to your chin. Joan blows out her candle. The darkness closes in. The smell of the room at night is the first thing that announces itself properly, now that there's nothing else to focus on. It comes in layers, and if you lie still and breathe carefully, you can almost identify each one separately, like sorting a pile of different cloths by texture. Top layer, thick and faintly rancid at the edges. the way any fat gets when it cools. Mutton tallow more than beef, if you've learned to tell the difference, which after 4 months you have. Below that, the rushes on the floor. Down in the hall and the parlour, the rushes are changed every few weeks when they get too foul. Up here in the servants' room there are no rushes, just bare boards. But the smell comes up through the floor anyway. The green going to brown smell of plant matter slowly returning to earth. A vegetable sweetness that is almost pleasant if you don't think too hard about what it means. Below that, bodies. 5 of them in a small room. People in 1555 don't bathe the way you do. This is not ignorance or laziness. It is the practical reality that water has to be heated and carried bucket by bucket, that fuel costs money, that time is limited, and that the prevailing medical wisdom of the day actually suggests that bathing opens the pores and allows disease to enter the body. People wash their hands and faces regularly. They wash their hair occasionally. They change their linen when they can. But a full bath, in the sense that you mean, is not a regular feature of most people's lives. You are one of these people. You smell of yourself, which after 4 months you no longer notice, except occasionally when you first enter a room that's been empty. Then you walk in and get a sudden sharp reminder that you smell of sweat and smoke and the particular chemistry of your own body. This is not shame. This is Tuesday. And below all of that, under all the human and vegetable and animal smells, stone. Cold stone from the floors below, from the foundations, from the city itself. London houses are built on centuries of settlement, and beneath the boards and the plaster and the centuries of human occupation, the stone of the earth is cold in a way that nothing entirely warms. You close your eyes. Outside, a watchman calls the hour. 9 o'clock, and all is well, though the way he says it doesn't sound entirely like he believes it. 9 o'clock in London in September 1555, the reign of Queen Mary Tudor, first Queen Regnant of England, 2nd year on the throne. The fires at Smithfield still burning. All is well. Sleep doesn't always come easily, not in the city, not at first. In Wickham Market you went to bed when it was dark and woke when it was light, because that was what the world told you to do. The village noise was night animal noise, an owl, a fox somewhere in the distance, the occasional dog giving one sharp bark and then silence. It stopped. It resumed. It was intermittent. London doesn't stop. The taverns on Cheapside stay open until midnight and beyond. The noise they generate, laughter, singing, the occasional argument spilling into the street, comes up through the shutter, muffled but persistent. Cart horses clop over the cobbles even in the small hours, because the carters bring goods into the city at night, when the streets are less crowded and there's no law against it. The night soil men come with their carts and their long-handled scoops and collect the waste from the privies and cesspits, and this work is done at night because it's slightly less offensive to everyone when you don't have to watch it, and the smell of it rises up on the night air and mixes with everything else in the general London atmosphere. Someone across the street has a dog that barks at the watch every time he passes. Every single time. You've memorized the rhythm of it. The watchman's footsteps on the cobbles, his voice calling the hour, the pause the dog's bark, the watchman's muttered imprecation, the receding footsteps. Every hour, all night, until dawn. You don't hate the dog. You can't afford to. Hatred takes energy, and everything takes enough of it already. But you've had some uncharitable thoughts in his direction in the small dark hours of November. Joan is snoring. It's a quiet sound, rhythmic, almost comforting in its consistency. It means nothing is wrong. The room is warm enough, everyone is present, everything is as it should be. Little Alice makes no sound when she sleeps. She might not be there at all, except that occasionally she rolls over and the pallet makes a sound under her, a small crackling, and you know she's still present, still alive, still the same small, warm presence she was when you lay down. The tallow candle is out. The room is dark. You listen to the city and wait for sleep. Here is something about Tudor nights that nobody tells you in the history books, or at least not often enough. People didn't sleep through them. Not straight through the way you probably do. Not 8 hours of continuous unconsciousness from dark to dawn. In 1555, and for centuries before and after, people slept in 2 phases. This is well documented. You can find it in diaries, in letters, in medical texts of the period. They called it first sleep and second sleep, and the gap between them, the waking period, lasted anywhere from an hour to 2 hours and was considered completely normal. Not insomnia, not a disorder, just how the night worked. When you let the body do what the body does without artificial light pushing it into the single long sleep we've normalized, you fall asleep around 9 or past. You sleep for 4 or 5 hours, your first sleep, and then somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning you wake up. Not because something disturbed you, not because you're anxious, because your body is done with the first sleep and is waiting for the second. In this in-between time, people did things. They prayed. They talked to their bedfellows if they shared a bed, which most people did. They thought about things. Problems that needed solving. Dreams that needed examining. Plans that needed making. They sometimes got up and moved around. In some households, the in-between waking was when you checked the fire, when you checked on sick family members, when you dealt with whatever couldn't wait. In the cold months, this was also when you added fuel to the fire if you were the one responsible for maintaining it, which you are. Joan wakes you, not by shaking you or speaking. She doesn't need to. She just shifts on her mattress, and the sound of the frame is enough to bring you up from the first sleep. The room is black. The candle is cold. The fire in the hall below will need tending. This is your job. You're the youngest, the newest, the one at the bottom. Banking and tending the fire through the night is not quite stated in the formal terms of your position, but understood, implied in the nature of things. Joan told you the first week, not unkindly, just factually. That's yours to see too. You find your shoes by touch in the dark. They're where you left them, always where you left them. You've become very consistent about this because the alternative is a blind search on your hands and knees. You put them on without tying them properly. You feel your way to the door, open it carefully and step onto the landing. The staircase is darker than the room, which is saying something. One hand on the wall, left side where the plaster is rougher. Count the stairs. 7 to the landing. Turn. 8 more to the second floor. 5 more to the hall. The house makes its nighttime sounds around you. Creaks and settlings that you've learned are just the building speaking to the cold, nothing more alarming than that. The hall is not dark. Not entirely. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a deep red glow, a mound of embers that gives off just enough light to see the shapes of things. The long trestle table folded up and leaning against the wall, the stools on top of it, the rushes on the floor, pale and flattened in the ember light, the shadows of the room, thick and soft and alive seeming in firelight, even when the fire is almost out. The shadows move when the embers shift, small and barely perceptible, just enough movement to make the room feel occupied. The hall smells of supper hours gone. Mutton fat and onion, wood smoke, tallow, the faint yeasty smell of the bread that was baked yesterday and is already staling on the shelf, and underneath it all stone, the stone of the hearth, the stone of the floor at the hearth edge, the particular coldness of stone at 2 a.m, when all the warmth the day gave it has leaked away into the dark. You go to the wood basket beside the hearth. There are logs here, short split sections of oak and ash, and you take 2 of them and place them on the embers carefully, crossing them the way Joan showed you in your first week, not just dropping them, setting them, so the air can get between them and the embers can breathe, so the fire catches and doesn't smother. The logs are rough under your hands, the bark still on them, the occasional sliver of wood that you learn to feel for before gripping properly. Then you wait. This is the part nobody talks about, the waiting. You stand in the near dark beside the hearth and watch the first tendrils of flame lick up around the new wood, and you wait to make sure it catches, and while you wait, the silence of the sleeping house settles around you. The city outside is quieter at 2 a.m, not silent, never silent, but the tavern noise is reduced to a distant murmur, and the cartwheels are less frequent. The watchman will call the hour from somewhere close. The dog will bark. The watchman will respond. The fire catches. A small yellow flame appears, then another. The wood pops once, a small sharp sound in the quiet, then begins its deeper crackling. The smell of fresh burning fills the hall, different from old smoke, cleaner, more immediate. You stand there for a moment longer than you need to. The city is quiet. The household is asleep. The fire is going. For just this moment, the hall is yours. You know you shouldn't stand here. You should go back to bed, get whatever hours remain before the bells pull you into the morning. But there's something in this particular silence. The fire talking to itself, the house breathing around you, the darkness held back by a small and improbable circle of orange light, that holds you in place. Back in Wickham Market, you were afraid of the night. Not specifically afraid, no boogeyman, no particular terror. But the night outside the house was something to close the door against, to bar the shutters against, to wait through until morning. Here, in this city, in this hall, at 2 a.m, the night feels different, dangerous in different ways, stranger, bigger, but also somehow, honestly against all logic, more alive. This is a thought you haven't spoken aloud to anyone. You're not sure it makes sense, but it's there at 2 a.m, watching the fire. The watchman calls the hour below, 2 o'clock. You go back upstairs to your second sleep. Morning comes hard. Not because of the hour. You've been waking before dawn for your whole life. You come from a family that treated sleep as something you did when the work was finished, and no sooner. But because London morning is an assault, not a gentle arrival of light, an assault. The church bells start before the sky is properly lightened. Not just one church. The city of London has something like 100 churches within its walls, and many of them have bells, and they do not coordinate. This one is ringing matins. That one is ringing for a different reason entirely. A third has gone rogue and is ringing for reasons that are not entirely clear even to the parish. The bells overlap. They create a sound that is not harmony and not quite cacophony, but something between. A dense, churning, unavoidable sounding of time, all the hours ringing at once, London announcing itself to the dawn, and with the bells, the vendors. London street vendors start their rounds at first light. Before first light in some cases. The milk sellers come first, driving their cows through the streets and milking them on the spot for customers who come to their doors. An extraordinary thing when you first saw it. A cow being milked on Cheapside as the sky went pink. The bread sellers are not far behind. The bakers have been up since midnight, their ovens burning through the dark, and the bread comes out hot in the hours before dawn, and it does not stay warm long. The fish sellers, the vegetable sellers, the sellers of small coals for the morning fire, all of them crying their wares, all of them loud because the street is loud and you have to be louder than the street. All of them beginning, from your perspective in the attic, as a kind of insistent rhythmic human music that rises from below and means it's time. Get up. The day has found you. Joan is already up when you wake. She's always already up. You've tried to beat her to it twice in 4 months and failed both times. How she manages it is a mystery you've stopped trying to solve. The room is cold. The brazier is not yet lit. It won't be lit until October, when Dame Alice decides it's cold enough to authorise the extra charcoal. Until then, September mornings in the attic are simply cold mornings in the attic, and you dress quickly. Shift, stockings, petticoat, kirtle, apron, coif, pulling each item on with quick, practised movements, the cold making your fingers less nimble than you'd like. The wool of the kirtle is scratchy against the shift for the first few minutes until it warms, and then it's just the kirtle, just the day beginning. Little Alice is still asleep, her knees up under her chin, her breathing slow and even. She doesn't start her household work until the family wakes. You've always been slightly envious of this, and also slightly fond of her for it. There's something reassuring about Alice asleep, compact and unhurried, a small piece of the household that isn't yet demanding anything of anyone. You go downstairs to the kitchen. The kitchen is the best room in the house to be in on a cold morning. It's not large, maybe 12 feet by 15, with a low ceiling blackened above the enormous hearth. But it's warm. The kitchen fire never really goes out. You banked it last night. You tended it at 2 a.m. And by the time you come in now, it's alive and hot, giving off a heat that you feel on your face from across the room. The heat lands on your forehead like a hand. The heat comes with the smell. Wood smoke. Yes, always wood smoke, but also the residual smell of last night's supper, the onion and mutton smell, and underneath it something sweeter. The bread Joan has already started. She's a fast worker, Joan. She'll have mixed the dough before you came to tend the fire, which means she's been up since before you. Maybe since before the bells, in the genuine pre-dawn dark where even the watch is half asleep. She's at the big work table now, kneading bread. The motion is entirely automatic, mechanical, produced by decades of repetition. Push, fold, turn, push. Her hands moving without direction from her mind, which is elsewhere. The dough slaps against the board and pulls away with a sound that is also entirely familiar, the sound of morning in this kitchen. She does this every day, and has done it every day since she was younger than you. "Good morning," you say. She glances up. "Fire's good?" "It caught clean, both logs." She nods and goes back to the bread. This is normal conversation. Joan is not cold. She's just economical with words in the morning, saving her energy for the work. By midday she'll be talking more if the work's going well. By evening she might even tell you something about herself. The husband she had for 3 years who died of a sweating sickness when she was 26. The daughter who went to work in a house in Aldgate and sends word sometimes. The village in Kent she grew up in, where she says the air was clean enough to taste. But that's midday or evening. Now it's morning, and there's bread to make and fires to feed and water to heat and a family to breakfast before Master Aldgate opens his shop. You take up the bucket. The water barrel in the kitchen is not full. It was half empty when you checked last night, and the nearest conduit is 3 streets away. This is the first outdoor errand of the morning. Water, always water. Outside is cold and wet, not raining. That particular September coldness that sits in the air after a night of dew. Everything surfaces slightly damp, the cobbles glistening under the early sky that is just beginning to go grey-pink in the east. Your breath comes out as small white clouds, one with each step. The cold takes hold of your face immediately, your ears, the backs of your hands where the gloves don't reach. Cheapside is already alive. Not fully. It's not yet 6 in the morning. The proper bustle is still building, but alive. A group of journeymen are walking quickly somewhere, their tools wrapped in cloth under their arms. A boy is driving a small herd of pigs along the gutter. They squeal and dart, 4 of them, going faster than pigs look like they should be able to go. A dairymaid leads her cow, the animal moving with the calm bovine indifference to everything around her, and a woman has already come out of her door to buy milk, holding her cap against a small wind. The conduit is a stone cistern set into a niche in the wall of a large house near the church of St. Mary le Bow. Water from the Tyburn stream, the Tyburn that runs underground through much of London, tapped and piped and directed, is brought here through lead pipes that the city has been building and extending for the last century. This is advanced civil engineering for 1555. Not everywhere in London has it. Your neighbourhood does, which is one of the things that marks the Cheapside area as respectable. A neighbourhood where the infrastructure works, where things have been maintained, where money has been spent on the collective good. There are 3 women already at the conduit when you arrive. You wait. While you wait, you watch the street. This is something you've started to do. Not the wide-eyed gawking of the first weeks, something more deliberate. You watch the way a carpenter watches a building, looking at how things are constructed, how they hold together, how they might fall apart. The woman ahead of you in line has a limp. You've seen her here before. She lives 2 doors from the conduit and still comes here every morning with her bucket. She nods at you. You nod back. You don't know her name. In 4 months you've exchanged perhaps 10 words. But there's a recognition there, a tiny social acknowledgement. Yes, we're both here, both doing this, both up before the sun has properly established itself. Your turn at the conduit. The water is cold enough to make your hands ache immediately, a deep cold that goes straight through the skin and into the knuckles. You fill the bucket. It's heavy. A full bucket of water weighs nearly 40 pounds, and you hoist it and start back, your right shoulder taking the strain, your left arm out for balance. Your arms will be strong by the end of this year. They already are. You carry water, you carry wood, you carry bundles of washing, you carry coal when the household switches to coal fuel in the winter. Your shoulders and forearms, which were just a girl's shoulders and forearms when you arrived in June, are now something else, something more useful. You walk back to the kitchen. The bucket bangs against your thigh with each step. The water sloshes. The sky is pink now. The day has properly begun. By mid-morning the household is in full motion, and has been for hours. Master Aldgate is in the shop, talking to customers, examining cloth, making the calculations that keep the household running. Dame Alice is in the solar, overseeing the sewing work. She and her eldest daughter and 2 neighbour women who come in do embroidery that Dame Alice sells to a mercer on Cheapside. silk thread on fine linen, flowers and birds and complex geometric patterns that take more patience and skill than you can currently imagine. Joan is cooking. This is a continuous activity from dawn to night, and you are doing about 6 things at once. Sweeping the hall, watching the pot of pottage on the kitchen fire because Joan has gone out back to do something. You're supposed to be beginning the washing, which has been waiting 3 days because it rained and there's no point hanging washing out when it's going to get wet again. You have also been asked to go to the apothecaries on Bread Street when you get a moment, which you will not have a moment for until at least midday. London domestic service in 1555 is not a job with defined hours and a written list of duties. It is a state of constant availability to need, organised by Joan and Dame Alice in a hierarchy of urgency, all needs roughly urgent, all tasks perpetually behind. You are learning not to mind this, or rather, you've accepted that minding it accomplishes nothing, which is approximately the same thing. Here is something that Master Aldgate said one afternoon in October, in the shop when you were passing through with an armload of cloth he'd asked Joan to have pressed, and he stopped you. "Girl, brewer, isn't it? From Suffolk?" "Yes, master." "Your family? Farmers?" "My father is a tanner, master. My grandfather was a farmer." He looked at you the way men sometimes look at things they're assessing the value of. Not unkindly, just appraisingly. Something in his gaze that you've learned to read as the merchant's habit of evaluation turned briefly onto a person. There's a difference between a tanner's daughter and a farmer's. A tanner has a trade. A trade is a thing you can pass down. Your father has something. Your grandfather had land he rented from someone. He took the cloth from you and started toward the back of the shop, then paused. You're learning the house quickly. Joan says you're a reliable worker. He said this without quite looking at you. That's worth something. Don't let the city make you otherwise. And then he went back to his work. You stood in the shop for a moment, holding nothing, before you remembered where you were supposed to be going. You've thought about that moment many times since. Don't let the city make you otherwise. Make you otherwise than what? Reliable? Quick to learn? Or otherwise than what you were when you came? That particular Suffolk earnestness, that quality that London can grind away if you let it, if you're not careful, if the noise and the pace and the smoke get into you deeply enough. You haven't figured it out entirely, but you haven't forgotten it either. Now let me tell you about the rushlights. Rushlights are exactly what they sound like. You take the rushes from marsh edges, the long pithy reeds that grow at the edges of rivers and ponds, which you can find along the Thames banks if you know where to look, and you dry them carefully, and then you strip away most of the outer coating, leaving just a thin green skin on one side to give the pith rigidity, and then you draw the rush through liquid fat, tallow again, or grease saved from cooking, and let it set. What you end up with is a long, thin, limp candle that burns for perhaps 20 minutes and gives off a pale, yellowish-grey light that is barely adequate for seeing your hand in front of your face, but technically counts as light. Rushlights smoke, not the gentle wispy smoke of a well-made tallow candle. Rushlights smoke persistently, a thin grey-brown thread that rises from the burning end and smells of the particular combination of damp rush and animal fat. Not a pleasant smell, but a very familiar one in every household in England below a certain economic level. The smell of evening work, the smell of getting things done before the proper candle is allowed. In the servants' room in the evenings before the tallow candle is lit, while you're still doing the last tasks, folding clothes, preparing things for morning. A rushlight in an iron holder on the floor gives you just enough to work by. The smoke from it collects above your heads. Little Alice, who is small, ends up at about rushlight smoke level when she's standing, and she coughs sometimes. Joan has observed this and told her to stand on a stool when the rushlight is burning. Alice does not always do this. "Child, you'll ruin your eyes doing that by rushlight," Joan tells you one evening in November, when you're mending a tear in your apron by the light of a single rush, the tallow candle sitting unused on its shelf to save it for later. "I'm saving the tallow." "You're saving the tallow and going blind doing it. I've got good eyes. You've got young eyes. That's not the same thing." She sits down on her bed and begins her evening routine. Tallow was given to us to burn it. Dame Alice counts them. Dame Alice counts them because some girl in this house was burning through 2 a night for a month and never said why. That's not your problem. Burn one candle at the right time for the purpose it's intended. You light the tallow candle. The difference is immediate and physical. The rushlight's grey dimness gives way to a warm golden circle that reaches the far wall, picks out the details of the room, shows you the torn apron clearly enough that you can mend it properly without squinting. Your eyes relax. You hadn't even noticed they were straining until they stop. "Better," Joan says. Not triumphant, just factual. And now, the October 17th. This is the day that changes something in you, or starts to. The change will take months to fully arrive, but it starts here, on this Tuesday morning in October. You're at the conduit, earlier than usual, because the household has guests for supper, and Joan has given you a long list of things to fetch. You have your bucket of water, and you're about to go to the fish market when you notice that the street is busier than usual, and the people moving through it are moving in one direction, east, towards Smithfield, which is outside the city wall past St. Paul's. You ask the woman next to you, Goodwife Hart, whose name you've learned by now, the woman with the limp, where everyone is going. She looks at you with an expression you can't quite read. Something between warning and resignation. "Smithfield," she says. "What's happening at Smithfield?" She's quiet for a moment, looks at you again with that expression. "There's a burning," she says, and then she picks up her bucket and walks away. "You've known about the burning since before you came to London. Everyone in England knows about the burnings. Queen Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, a devout Catholic queen who believes that her father's break with Rome was an abomination, that the Protestant changes of Edward VI's reign were heresy, and that the way to restore England to God's grace is to restore it to Rome and deal with those who resist by the method that has always been applied to heretics: fire. In 1555, in the 2 years since she took the throne, nearly 300 people have been burned, or will be burned at the stake in England, a Protestant martyrdom that will define her reign in English memory for centuries to come. The name they'll give her, Bloody Mary, will stick so hard that 500 years from now it will still be the first thing many people think of when they hear her name. She'll never know that. She'll die in 1558 believing she's brought England back to God. In London, this happens at Smithfield. The Smooth Field, it's sometimes called, a large open space just outside the city's northwest corner, traditionally the site of the annual Bartholomew Fair, of horse markets, of livestock sales. Now, in these years, also the site of burnings. You are Protestant. You don't talk about this. You don't discuss it with anyone in this household. You don't know with certainty what Joan is, what Dame Alice is, what anyone in this household believes, because nobody discusses it, because discussing it is how you get in trouble. There are informers in London, there is a government apparatus for pursuing heresy, and the consequences of being found out are severe. People have been burned for saying things at supper, for owning a Protestant Bible, for refusing to attend Mass with sufficient conviction. You go to Mass every Sunday, all 5 of you from the household, walking to the church of St. Mary Le Bow together, standing in the nave of the Latin service, going through the motions with the appropriate expressions. Joan crosses herself with what looks like genuine piety. Dame Alice prays with apparent sincerity. You go through the motions and think about other things and come home and say nothing. You don't go to Smithfield to watch the burning on October 17th. You go to the fish market instead and buy the plaice Joan asked for and the salt cod and the small barrel of oysters, and you carry them back to Cheapside with your bucket of water, and you do not go to Smithfield, and you do not think about Smithfield. It doesn't entirely work. The supper that night is a good supper by any measure. Joan has made a wonderful stew of mutton with dried fruits and spices, and a pastry filled with fish, and the oysters opened and laid out on a board. The guests are 2 men who do business with Master Aldgate, men of his own sort, solid merchants in good coats, with wives who talk to Dame Alice about fabric and prices, and a son of perhaps 17 who sits at the end of the table, looking like he'd rather be elsewhere. You serve the food, you clear the plates, you refill the cups. While you're doing this, you listen. Not intentionally, but unavoidably. You're in the room, and people speak, and you hear. The merchants are talking about the burnings, not with horror, not with celebration either. With a careful, navigated neutrality that you've come to recognise as the only safe way to discuss the subject in mixed company in London in 1555. They discuss the numbers. How many have been burned this year? How many are expected? They discuss the effect on trade. Some of the burned were merchants themselves, which creates complications. They discuss the Queen's husband, Philip of Spain, and whether Spain's influence on English religious policy is too great, which is a political point that can be made without saying anything directly about the burnings themselves. Master Aldgate says very little. He refills his cup. He eats his mutton. He asks about prices at the cloth market. Dame Alice excuses herself to check on something in the kitchen, and while she is there, for the 2 minutes she is in the kitchen while you are also in the kitchen, she says nothing about what is being discussed in the hall. She tastes the sauce for the next course, and says it needs more salt and goes back. Later, after the guests have gone and the cleaning is done and you're in the attic room in the dark waiting for sleep, you think about Master Aldgate sitting at his table saying nothing, a man who said, "Don't let the city make you otherwise." You wonder what he means by otherwise now. Winter arrives the way it always does, not dramatically but irresistibly, a gradual tightening of the cold, a progressive shortening of the days, a deepening of the dark until December mornings feel like the dark has decided to stay. The brazier is lit in the servants' room. The charcoal costs money. Dame Alice is specific about this, a fixed quantity per week, no more. But it's lit, and the small warmth it provides is the difference between falling asleep easily and lying awake with your toes curled against the cold, unable to relax. You've learned to bank it before bed. Not too much. Too much charcoal at night in a closed room is dangerous, the invisible death that people don't always understand until it's too late. A person sleeping soundly and not waking in the morning because the air in the room ran out of whatever it is that makes air sustaining. You leave the shutter cracked in even the coldest nights. Joan is firm about this. A finger's width, she says. No more, no less. Cold won't kill us. The other thing will. She means the charcoal fumes. She's seen it happen, or knows someone who has. She doesn't discuss it further than that, but the instruction is clear and you follow it absolutely. A finger's width of gap in the shutter, cold creeping in, the brazier burning. The balance between freezing and suffocating that is a specific feature of winter nights in enclosed spaces in this century. You sleep with your cloak over you on the worst nights. The wool is scratchy but warm, a good heavy scratchy that eventually settles into you and becomes bearable. In January you'll learn to sleep in your stockings and your kirtle, because the cold by then is enough to wake you from the second sleep with your whole body shivering. December brings frost. The water in the conduit freezes on 3 mornings in a row. The first morning this happens, you go to the conduit with your bucket and stand in front of a block of ice, and understand immediately that you will not be getting water from here today. The cistern is solid. The delivery pipe is solid. The thin coating of ice on the cobbles around it is treacherous underfoot. You go back to Joan. "The conduit's frozen," you say. "I know. We'll use the rain barrel today. 2 buckets should do until it thaws." The rain barrel is the barrel at the corner of the house that collects runoff from the roof. In summer it fills with green, slightly murky water that you use for washing. In December it has a skim of ice on top that you have to break with the heel of your hand, a sharp crack, and then the ice giving way in chunks, your knuckles stinging. The water underneath is cold enough to make your knuckles ache for the rest of the morning. January of 1556 is when the Thames freezes. You hear about it first from Joan, who heard it from the wood merchant. The Thames, which runs in its wide black channel 1/2 mile south of Cheapside, which is the lifeblood of London and the highway for half the trade of England, which is too wide and too fast-moving to freeze except in the coldest of winters. The Thames has frozen solid. You go to the Frost Fair on Sunday. With little Alice and Joan, with Robert, who usually goes his own way on Sundays but is curious enough to come along, the 4 of you walking down through the city to the river stairs, and then, carefully, the ice groaning faintly underfoot, walking out onto the Thames. It doesn't feel like the river. The Thames is the river, the great moving force that defines London from the south. The river is not something you walk on. The river is something you cross on a bridge or pay a waterman to carry you across. But today, in January 1556, you are walking on the river, and on the river there are tents and stalls selling ale and food and trinkets. There are bonfires burning on the ice, not in pits, just on the ice itself, though the fires melt down into shallow pools of water that freeze again at the edges. There are people everywhere, hundreds of them, a cross-section of London walking on this extraordinary temporary road, this gift of the cold. You buy a paper of roasted chestnuts from a boy who set up a brazier at the water's edge. They're hot enough to warm your hands through the paper, and the smell of them, that sweet, smoky char, is somehow different from any other smoke, lighter and warmer. Alice slips on the ice and lands on her backside and is completely fine, but laughs so hard at herself that you all start laughing. There on the frozen Thames in January, Robert nearly falling over himself, Joan shaking her head with something that is definitely not a smile but is very close to one. Robert finds his friends and disappears into the crowd. Joan stands and looks at the city from the middle of the river. You stand beside her. From the ice, looking north, London resolves into a different thing than it looks from the streets. The towers, the church spires, a forest of them, more than you can count, each one representing a church, a parish, a congregation of Londoners going about their Sunday business. the great bulk of St. Paul's above everything else, the smoke from 10,000 chimneys rising in the cold air, thin columns of grey going straight up into a clear winter sky, and where they accumulate above the roofline they create the familiar London haze, the brown-grey ceiling that sits over the city every winter morning. Viewed from out here on the river, that ceiling is beautiful in a way it isn't when you're inside it. From out here, it looks like weather. "What are you thinking?" you ask Joan. She's quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking it's cold," she says, "and that the chestnuts were worth the money." She hands you another one. You eat it. The warmth travels down through your chest. "Have you always been in London?" you ask. "Since I were a girl, same age as you, near enough." "From Kent." "From Kent. My mother sent me to a household in Cheapside." A pause. "A good household. Better than this one, though I wouldn't say that to Dame Alice." "Do you miss Kent?" She thinks about this genuinely. Not the automatic no that you'd expect from a woman who built her life here. Actually thinks about it, her eyes on the city. "I miss the air," she says at last. "London air. You don't know what air smells like until you've been somewhere it doesn't smell like London." You look at the city, the smoke rising in its thin columns, the haze above the roofline, the city wrapped in its own exhalation. "Does it ever stop?" you ask. "The smoke?" She almost smiles. "When the weather changes, when the wind blows from the east. There are days in March when the air comes in off the sea and you can stand at the top of Ludgate Hill and see clear to the hills beyond." She pauses. "Not often." A bell rings somewhere in the city, then another. The Sunday bells calling people in from the frost. "We should go," Joan says. "We've been on the ice long enough." You walk back across the river carefully, your feet finding purchase on the ice. The cold comes up through your shoe soles and into your feet with each step, patient and relentless. Behind you, the frost fair continues. The fires burn on the river. London makes itself at home on the impossible. Spring comes slowly as it always does, but it comes. March brings rain first. Heavy, cold, driving rain that soaks through coats and turns the streets to rivers. And then later, a day of actual sun. A day in late March when you go out to the conduit in the morning and the air coming from the east is cold but clean. Genuinely clean, the way Joan described. And you stop in the middle of Cheapside and just breathe it. The smell of London is still there. The smoke, the animal smell, the general organic murk of 100,000 people living close together. But there's something beneath it on this particular morning. Something green and distant, the smell of open fields somewhere to the east, carried on the wind from Essex or Kent, the memory of countryside, and it reaches something in you that you hadn't realised was there to be reached. You are homesick. Specifically, suddenly, powerfully homesick, in a way that has nothing to do with being unhappy here. You like your work. You've made something like friends, with Alice, with Robert, even with Joan's difficult mornings. You've learned things. You've become something. But you miss Wickham Market in March. The particular smell of it in March. You carry your water home and make yourself think about other things. Summer comes, and with summer comes the plague watch. This is something nobody warned you about directly. You knew in an abstract way that plague existed, but you hadn't fully understood what it means to live in a city where plague is a recurring fact rather than an occasional horror. London has plague every few years, not every year usually, and not always severely, but regularly enough that people have developed an entire system for living with it. The city marks plague houses with a red cross painted on the door. The inhabitants are confined inside for 40 days. Watchmen stand at the doors to enforce the confinement. Provisions are delivered to the door by people who are presumably willing to take the risk for the wage. The smell is the sign. People say this. When the summer air starts to carry a particular sweet rot smell that's different from the normal sweet rot of London summer, that's when you know something specific has gone wrong somewhere close. In July 1556, you smell it twice. Once near Smithfield, a smell so strong and particular that you walk faster and press your sleeve against your nose and don't stop walking until you're 3 streets away. Once in the alley behind Cheapside, much closer to home, a smell that could be the midden but isn't quite right, and you look at the house on the alley's east side and there is a red cross on the door. You go back to the house and tell Joan. She nods. She already knows. The whole neighbourhood knows by now. "We don't go near that alley," she says. "For how long?" "Until the cross comes down or the house is empty, one of the two. The cross comes down after 3 weeks. You don't know which outcome. You learn not to ask. In Master Aldgate's household, nobody gets sick. You get a bad cold in August that keeps you in the attic room for 2 days, and for both days the terror of it. Is this a cold? Is this something worse? Sits with you every time you check your own body for signs. You check your armpits, your groin, the places where the swellings appear if it's the plague and not just a cold. They're clear. It's a cold. You know it's a cold. You get up on the 3rd day and go back to work, your chest still slightly tight, your voice slightly rough, but alive and functional and grateful. On a Thursday in December, one of Master Aldgate's prentice boys gets sick. Not the plague. You check yourself for this thought immediately. Just a fever. The sweating kind. The kind that comes with a bad cold in winter. The kind that might just be too many cold mornings and too little food and too much damp. Thomas, the young apprentice, has been looking pale for a week before Dame Alice finally puts her hand to his forehead and tells him to go upstairs. He's put in the hall with a blanket and the fire built up, and a pot of something Joan makes from boiled herbs that smells of rosemary and elder. You bring him the broth. This becomes your task because you're available. Joan is occupied with supper, Dame Alice is with the family, and so you are the one who carries the bowl upstairs and sets it by him, and checks whether he needs anything. He doesn't respond much. He's sweating. His face is flushed and his eyes are half open. He's 13 years old and a long way from home, from somewhere in Yorkshire, he told you once, a place called Skipton, that he described with the slightly performative boredom of a boy who is missing it very much but will not admit it. "Can you hear me?" you ask. He moves his head slightly. "Yes." "Joan made you broth. It's hot. Can you sit up?" It takes a few minutes to get him upright enough to drink. You hold the bowl. He takes small sips, the broth going down slowly. His hands, when he reaches for it, are shaking. "Thank you," he manages. "Don't thank me, thank Joan." He almost smiles. You check on him 4 times that day. The fever is high in the afternoon and lower by evening, which Joan says is a good sign. The kind of fever that goes up and comes down is not the dangerous kind usually. The dangerous kind just goes up. By the following morning, he's well enough to be annoyed by the confinement. By the 3rd day, he's back downstairs. You don't think much about the 3 days you spent carrying broth and checking on a sick boy. But later, when you try to describe London to your brother Thomas, when he comes to visit from Southwark in the spring, the first time you've seen him in nearly a year, you find yourself describing this moment more than the frost fair or the markets, or the burning crosses on the doors. Thomas sitting up in the hall in the December firelight, his hands shaking around a bowl of Joan's herb broth, the particular quality of a sick person's warmth. Not the warmth of health, but the warmth of the body fighting something, more urgent, less comfortable. The way he said thank you in a voice that was younger than his actual voice, the Yorkshire accent stronger than usual. You took care of someone, your brother says. Joan mostly. I just carried it upstairs. That's taking care of someone. That's what it looks like. Your brother Thomas visits on a Sunday afternoon in April. He's taller than you remember. 21 now, working as a journeyman carpenter in Southwark. His master is fair. He has a room of his own in a lodging house near the Bear Garden. You walk together through the Cheapside Market, which on Sunday is quiet but not absent. You buy him an apple from a woman at the corner. He eats it while walking. You look different, he says. How? More city? He glances at you. When you walked off the wagon in June, you were all wide eyes, looking everywhere. I still look everywhere. Not the same way. Now you look like you're measuring things, making decisions about them. He pauses, like you know what you're looking at. You understand exactly. You take him back to the house and introduce him to Joan. Joan gives him an assessing look, apparently satisfied, gives him a cup of ale and a piece of last week's cheese, and the three of you sit in the kitchen for an hour while the Sunday afternoon light shifts. Thomas asks Joan about London. How long has she been here? What is it like in winter? Is the fire in that kitchen really burning all the time? And Joan answers him with more patience than she usually gives to questions, because he is asking things that are worth asking, and because his Suffolk accent makes her look at him in a way that suggests she's hearing something from home. He stays another hour. He walks back through the city to the bridge, to Suffolk. You watch him go from the door of the shop, his tall back, his carpenter's gait. Already almost out of sight in the Cheapside crowd, you turn and go back inside. A full year. You realise it's been a year when you were at the Conduit one morning in June, and Goodwife Hart says, "You've been here a year now, haven't you? The Aldgate girl?" "Almost a year. From last June." She nods. Something in her expression shifts very slightly, an acknowledgement, a small upgrade in how she sees you. "You've lasted," she says. "Not all of them do." You don't ask who she means, you think you know. Girls who came to London from the country and didn't last, who got sick or got let go or found other work or went home. The city has its own particular attrition, the quiet way it selects for who gets to stay. You've lasted. That evening after supper, you go upstairs earlier than usual and sit by the window in the attic room. The shutters open for once, because it's a warm June evening and the air is almost pleasant, and look out over the Cheapside rooftops. A year. You came with a letter from a parish priest and a bundle of clothes and enough knowledge of cooking and cleaning to be useful. You came not knowing how to navigate a city, not knowing which vendors water their milk, not knowing how to manage a coal-burning hearth, not knowing the London slang that the market vendors use. Now you know. You know which suppliers are honest. You know that Joan's cough is worse in cold weather and better if she has something with ginger in it. You know that Master Aldgate keeps his ledger in a locked box under the shop counter, and that the key is on a chain around his neck, not because he doesn't trust his staff, but because that's just prudence. You know that Dame Alice's apparent sternness is a shell, and that underneath it she is a woman who worked very hard to build the life she has. You know how to bank a fire, how to read the embers and know whether the wood you're adding will catch or smother, how to feel the weight of a bucket of water in your shoulders and arms without flinching. You know the rhythm of the city, the bells in the morning, the vendors' cries, The shift in the light when afternoon slides into evening and the street noise changes character. You know which streets to avoid after dark and which are generally safe. You're not a girl from Suffolk anymore. You are something else, something London has made. That feeling is strange and not entirely comfortable, and also undeniably true. September again. 2 years almost. You're 17 years old and you've been in London 2 years, and you are, by any reasonable measure, a Londoner. Not born here. People born here will sometimes mention this, a mild distinction they keep between themselves and those who arrived. But here, present, shaped by this particular city in ways you'd only understand if you went away from it for a while and felt the absence. Joan told you something last winter that you've been turning over since. You were sitting in the kitchen after supper, just the two of you, the family long retired, a quiet November night with rain on the roof and the fire low, and you asked her, out of nowhere, whether she'd ever been frightened of London when she first arrived. She thought about this. Frightened isn't the word, she said. It was larger than I was when I first arrived. The size of it, the speed of it, the noise. She picked up a pot and set it by the fire to soak. I was sure I'd never get on top of it. Did you? You can't get on top of London, she said. You learn to walk alongside it. That's the best you can do. Walk alongside it. You think about this when you walk to the conduit in the mornings, when you navigate the market crowd, when you hear the bells of all the churches sounding the hour in their overlapping, unsynchronized way. You're not running to keep up. You're not being swept along. You're walking alongside it. That's something. That's real. In September, a full year after you arrived, the wheel come around. Dame Alice calls you into the solar one morning, not for a task, to sit. You sit. She looks at you with the same assessing quality her husband sometimes has. Direct, but not unfriendly. You've done well, she says. You don't know what to say, so you say nothing. Joan tells me you're reliable, that you've learned quickly, that you can be trusted with the fire and the shopping and the heavier work. She pauses. I'm going to increase your wage. Ma'am? By a penny a week. It's not much, but it's what I can justify. A penny a week. 4 pennies a month. Nearly 5 shillings over the course of a year. Not a fortune, but real. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. You've earned it. She picks up her embroidery. Send Alice up when you go down. You go downstairs. You find little Alice in the kitchen stealing pieces of dried fruit from the cooking jar while Joan pretends not to notice. Dame Alice wants you, you say. Alice makes a face and goes upstairs. You stand in the kitchen for a moment, holding the idea of the penny. Not the penny itself. The idea of it. You're worth something, specifically something. A calculated, assessed, confirmed something. That feels different from being given food and a place to sleep, which you've had since you arrived. Joan doesn't look up from the pot. Well, she says, she's raising my wage. A pause, then. I told her to. She stirs. Don't let it make you lazy. No, Joan. Good. A very brief pause. Congratulations. And now the night. One more time. This night specifically. Your room, your window, your September London. You've done your tasks. The fire is banked. The kitchen is clean. Dame Alice's household is fed and settled and safe behind its barred door. You climb the stairs for the 1000th time. Your body knows them. The 7 steps to the landing, the 8 to the 2nd floor, the narrow final flight to the attic, your hand finding the wall on the left side without thinking, your feet finding the right rhythm without counting. The door opens. The room is warmish, warm enough, the summer warmth still holding in the walls, the worst of the cold still a month away. Joan is reading, or trying to, a small book borrowed from Dame Alice's shelf. Something religious. The light not really adequate for it, but she persists. Little Alice is already asleep, curled small and complete. She always falls asleep quickly, Alice, like sleep is a place she's been waiting for all day, and is relieved to finally reach. You close the door softly. You take down your hair, pin by pin. The familiar smell of your own hair, warm from the cap, a little smoke, a little clean. You fold your things carefully. You unfold the palette. The tallow candle burns on its shelf. Joan turns a page. Outside, the watchman calls 9 o'clock. His voice is familiar now. You know his voice, the particular timbre of it, though you've never seen his face. He passes this way every hour through the night, and you've woken to him more times than you can count, and the sound of him saying all is well has become somehow a comfort, an assurance. The city still there, still organised, still managing. Joan closes her book, blows out her candle. "Good night," she says, not looking at you, just saying it. "Good night, Joan." Dark. Lie still. Feel the pallet under you, the familiar give of the straw, the familiar scratch of the blanket, the familiar weight of it across your legs. Feel the cold coming in through the shutter gap, thin and clean, the finger's width of outdoor air that means you're breathing and will keep breathing through the night. Somewhere very close, little Alice is asleep, warm and compact, breathing slow. She'll be 12 soon. She's growing. In a year or two, she'll be old enough for proper responsibilities. She'll be what you are now, and you'll be something else. Something further along, something you can't quite see from here but can feel the shape of. The fire in the hall has been banked. The embers will hold until 2, when you'll go down and add the logs, quietly, in the dark, in that private middle of the night hour that belongs to no one and everyone. The shop is shut. The household is safe. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof over your head and work that matters and people who are counting on you to show up tomorrow and do it all again. That's more than a lot of people in this city have. That's more than the woman who sleeps in the churchyard 2 streets from here. More than the men who come in from the country every week with no letter, no position, nothing, and sleep in the common lodging houses and eat what they can find. You came with a letter, and you've made something of it. That's enough. This is what it felt like. Not the version that ends up in the books. Not the version about kings and bishops and the Reformation and all the large-scale machinery of history. The ordinary version, the every-night version. The fire and the dark and the smoke and the cold and the sound of a city that never quite stops. The rushlight smoking in its holder, the tallow candle counting down, the first sleep and the in-between waking, and the second sleep carrying you to morning. The way the room smells, the way the cold comes in, the way the brazier does its quiet work. This is the version nobody recorded because it happened too often and to too many people to seem worth recording. This is what millions of people lived through every night for centuries. The texture of their evenings, the quality of their dark. The city changes in the centuries after this night. The smoke from wood becomes the smoke from coal, which becomes much worse before it becomes better. The tallow candles become oil lamps, become gas lamps, become electric light, and the darkness you know tonight becomes something people choose rather than something they're given. The plague comes and goes and comes again and is eventually mastered. The burning at Smithfield ends. The streets are paved. The conduits are replaced with pipes that run into every house. The straw pallets disappear. The noise doesn't disappear. The city doesn't disappear. The smell of London changes and changes, but it never entirely goes away. The human smell of a place where 1 million people live on top of each other, making and working and sleeping and waking. People still lie awake in London at 2 a.m. listening to the city, still have that in-between hour of private darkness, still feel the cold coming through whatever gap exists in the wall against the night. Some things don't change. The human heart doesn't change. The need for rest at the end of a long day, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let the first sleep take you the way it took Meg in her attic room on Cheapside 470 years ago. Let the world fade. Let the smoke settle. Let the candle smell grow thin and thread itself into the dark. Let the watchman's voice carry you down. Let the city keep its watch tonight without your help. You've worked. You've carried things. You've navigated the dark and tended the fire and built things up slowly and carefully, piece by piece, into something that holds. You've earned this. The straw pallet holds you. The rough blanket holds you. The dark holds you. The sounds of the city, that endless, familiar, persistent sound, holds you, not as something frightening, but as something known. Something yours. Let go. Let sleep do what sleep has always done, in this room and in rooms like it. For all the years before you, and all the years still to come, you are warm enough. You are safe enough. You are here. There is a fire banked in the hall below. There is a city alive outside the shutter. There is morning coming somewhere beyond the dark, still hours away. But that's for morning. Right now there is only this, the smoke settling, the dark complete, the second sleep opening like a door, and the warmth on the other side of it, and the quiet, and then nothing. Just rest, just the long, slow drift into dreams. There is something about the Tuesday mornings that you need to understand, because Tuesdays are market days in the part of London round Cheapside. And market days are when the city becomes something even more compressed and loud and alive than its ordinary daily self. You go to the market every Tuesday with a list Joan has prepared. The list is specific. Joan is always specific. She treats lists the way Master Aldgate treats his ledger, with the full seriousness of a document that might be audited. And you carry it folded in your apron pocket and consult it at each stall, working through the items in an order that Joan has calculated based on which stalls are next to each other and which vendors need to be visited before their best stock runs out. The market around Cheapside in 1555 is not a single location. It sprawls across multiple streets and alleys, vendors claiming their pitches before dawn, and defending them from competitors with the territorial intensity that you learn to respect. The broad street itself is for the established traders, the ones with regular pitches and built-up clientele. The narrower streets around it are where the cheaper, less reliable goods appear. The women selling herbs they've gathered at the river's edge. The men with cloth that might have fallen off a cart somewhere. The food sellers whose hygiene you don't examine too closely. The noise at the market is a particular noise. Not the general city roar, but something more purposeful, more directed. Every sound aimed at a transaction. Vendors have specific cries, specific phrases honed over years to stop a passing person, to make them turn, to make them consider. Fine apples, ripe and sweet. Mackerel, fresh mackerel straight from Billingsgate. Pins and points, a pin for a penny. The voices layer over each other until the individual words lose themselves, and what remains is a kind of insistent commercial music, the sound of 10,000 small arguments about value happening simultaneously. You've learned to move through it quickly. The first weeks, you were slow, stopping to look at things, getting drawn into conversations with sellers who wanted to sell you things you hadn't come to buy. Joan sent you back twice with the wrong items. Not harsh about it, just the flat, factual observation that you'd bought carrots when she wanted parsnips, and you'd need to go back and change them. Now you're faster. You keep your eyes ahead, make direct eye contact only with the vendor you intend to buy from, keep your basket close to your side where it can't be jogged. You know which fish seller gives you the genuine weight, and which one has a thumb on the scale. You know that the woman who sells dried herbs on the east side of the market charges half again more than the woman on the west side for the same quality of rosemary, and that this is because the east side woman has a better pitch and considers it her right to charge for it. The transactions themselves are almost always negotiations, at least below a certain price. Dame Alice has given you clear instructions on this. No more than 4 pence for a pound of good beef, no more than a halfpenny for a dozen eggs, no more than 2 pence for a bundle of faggots large enough to see the kitchen through a cold morning. These prices represent the floor of what's acceptable, Joan has explained, in the sense that paying less than this usually means the goods are not what they should be. Paying more than this means you've failed to negotiate properly, and Joan will know, because Joan always knows, with the unerring instinct of a woman who has been feeding households for 20 years. You negotiate. This is something you're getting better at. Not comfortable exactly. There's still a slight embarrassment in the back and forth, a Suffolk reticence about argument that the city hasn't entirely worn away. But better. You've learned to make a first offer and then wait. To wait longer than feels comfortable. To turn slightly away from the vendor as if considering elsewhere. To say, without apparent emotion, I think I'll see what they're asking on the other side, and mean it. Most of the time, the price moves. By October of your first year, Joan is sending you to the market alone on the days she's occupied with preserving. This is trust, not stated as trust. Joan doesn't announce these things, but you understand it as such. This smell of the market is its own particular thing, different from the smell of the street, different from the smell of the house. It is the smell of food, primarily fresh fish, and their particular cold sea and salt smell, live poultry, and the dusty feathery smell of birds in baskets, fruit going from ripe to overripe in the morning warmth, green vegetables still carrying the smell of earth, and underneath all of this the smell of people, dozens of vendors and hundreds of shoppers pressed together, their breath and their bodies and their various trades all contributing to a warm, layered human atmosphere. In summer, this smell intensifies dramatically. The fish sellers' stalls, in particular, require a certain acceptance of olfactory compromise that you develop over time. By August, you walk through the fish section of the market holding your breath for the last few steps and breathing again only when you've made your purchases and moved on. This is not unusual. Most people do the same thing, and the fish sellers are well aware of their own products' limitations in warm weather, which is why they're selling loudly and quickly, and discounting anything that's been in the morning heat too long. There was a day in August, your first August, the August of 1555, when you bought a piece of salt cod that turned out to be not what the seller had represented, in the specific sense that by evening it smelled of something other than salt cod, and Joan threw it into the street without comment, which was more damning than any lecture she could have given. You went back the next Tuesday and found the vendor and told him, clearly and without raising your voice, that the salt cod he'd sold you was bad, and that you'd like either a replacement or your money back. He stared at you for a moment, then he gave you a replacement piece and halfpenny. Joan said nothing when you came home with the replacement, but she noticed. In the evenings, after supper, after the kitchen is clean and the shop is shut and the household has settled, there is sometimes a period, an hour, maybe two, that belongs to nobody in particular. Master Aldgate is in his chamber going over his accounts or reading. Dame Alice is sewing or talking with a neighbour woman who comes in sometimes. The prentice boys are somewhere. Joan is done with the cooking and sits in the kitchen with her knitting or her book. This is the closest thing to leisure that you have. You use it in various ways. Some evenings you sit with Joan in the kitchen, listening to her talk. She talks more in the evenings when the work is done and the pressure of the day is off, and the things she says are often interesting in the specific way that the observations of someone who has been watching carefully for decades are interesting. She has opinions about the merchants on Cheapside, about the quality of this year's grain versus last year's, about the Queen and her Spanish husband and what it means for English trade, expressed carefully and without recklessness, but expressed nonetheless. Some evenings you go up to the attic room early and sit by the window with the shutters cracked and watch the street below. Cheapside in the evening has its own particular character, the daytime business giving way to something more domestic, more leisurely, more human. People walking not in the purposeful commercial rush of business hours, but more slowly, talking, pausing, living. A woman at the window opposite hanging something on a line in the last of the light. Two men outside the tavern door 3 buildings down, standing in companionable silence with their tankards, not drinking, just being. Some evenings little Alice finds you and wants to talk. Alice at 11 is at an age where she wants to know things, not the things she's supposed to be learning, the embroidery and the household management that her mother is teaching her, but the other things, the real things. What is it like in the countryside? Why do the bells at St. Dunstan's ring differently from the bells at St. Mary-le-Bow? What happened to the girl who worked in this house before you? Where do the night soil men take the night soil? You answer what you can. You don't know what happened to the girl before you, but you could speculate, though you don't. You tell her about Wickham Market, the fields, the smell of it in spring, the particular silence of a winter night when the snow comes down and the whole world goes muffled. She listens to this with an expression you recognise as a version of the homesickness you felt in March, except she's never been away from London long enough to have the thing you're describing, and is instead homesick for something she's never had. "Is it better there?" she asks one evening, sitting at the attic window beside you. "Different," you say. "Quieter, more sky." "Do you want to go back?" You think about this honestly. "I don't know," you say. "Sometimes. And then I'm here and I think, no, not yet. Not for a long time." She seems to find this acceptable. She goes back downstairs. You watch the street a little longer. The Sunday after the October burning, the one you didn't go to, the one that Goodwife Hart told you about at the Conduit. You go to Mass at St. Mary-le-Bow with the household. You go every Sunday. You've been going every Sunday since you arrived. This is not a choice, or not a free one. Under Queen Mary's laws, attending Mass is an obligation. The penalties for absence are real. Watching who attends and who doesn't is something the parish notices. The church is cold. It is always cold. The stone walls hold winter through spring and into summer, and even on the warmest Sunday in July there is a chill that lives in the corners of the nave, in the stone of the floor under your feet, in the air around the columns. In November it is simply cold all the way through. The Latin service washes over you. You know some of the words. You've heard this enough times now that certain phrases have settled into memory like songs you didn't intend to learn. The incense is thick and sweet and rises in spirals toward the painted ceiling, and the candles on the altar are wax, the real thing, not tallow, and they burn with a clean bright flame that puts your attic candles to shame. You cross yourself at the right moments. You follow the movements of the people around you. You kneel on the hard stone floor and try to look like someone who is praying and not like someone who is thinking about the shopping list for tomorrow. Master Aldgate stands at the front of the family grouping, his hands folded, his expression devout and unreadable. Dame Alice has her beads, her rosary, the Catholic devotion that Edward VI's Protestant reforms tried to prohibit, and Mary has now returned to respectability, and she moves through them with practised fingers during the quieter parts of the service. The priest is a small man with a powerful voice, and his sermon today is on the virtue of obedience. Obedience to God, obedience to the Queen, obedience to the proper order of the Church. He speaks for 20 minutes on this theme with evident conviction. You think about the burning, about the 3 men who died at Smithfield last Tuesday in the name of their conviction that God did not require what this priest is describing. You think about the fact that you are standing in this church in your best Sunday clothes, your dark wool kirtle, and the white cap you keep clean specifically for Sundays, going through the motions of a faith that is not entirely yours, because the other option is not one you can afford to explore. You think, I am learning to walk alongside things. You don't know if this is wisdom or cowardice. You're 15 years old. Maybe you don't need to know yet. The service ends. You file out into the Sunday morning air, which today is cold and clear. The kind of November morning where you can see your breath, and the sky overhead is a clean, aching blue. The congregation disperses to their homes, to their Sunday dinners, to their various private versions of what faith means to them. Master Aldgate stops on the church steps and exchanges a few words with another merchant, a man from a nearby parish. You don't know what they talk about. You're standing back, you and little Alice, waiting. But you watch Master Aldgate's face, and it's the same face he had at the supper table when the merchants were discussing the burnings. Present, attentive, carefully saying nothing that could later be misinterpreted. That is a skill, you think. The skill of being in a room and understanding everything that's happening and saying very precisely what can be said safely and no more. Maybe that's what he meant. Don't let the city make you otherwise. Don't let it make you careless with words. Don't let it make you the person who says too much at the wrong table in the wrong year. There are years when silence is a kind of wisdom. 1555 is one of those years. The cold intensifies in November in a way that is physical, personal, not to be reasoned with. It arrives in the mornings now before you've fully woken, before the room has had time to warm from the bodies sleeping in it, and it sits in the cold floorboards under your bare feet, and the cold basin water you wash your face in, and the cold air coming in through the shutter gap. November cold is different from January cold, which will be its own thing entirely. November cold is almost apologetic. It hasn't fully committed yet. It comes in the mornings and retreats somewhat by midday and comes back after dark. It's cold that could still change its mind if the weather shifted. You don't trust it. You've started sleeping in your stockings as a precaution. The brazier has been authorised since October, and it makes a real difference to the attic room. Not enough to make the room warm, but enough to make it habitable. The particular smell of the charcoal burning is something you've come to associate with safety. A warm, low smell that means the room is being taken care of, that somebody has done the work of providing for the night. You bank it before bed with the care Joan has taught you. Not too high, you've heard the stories, everyone has heard the stories, but not too low, because a brazier that goes out at 2 a.m. in November is a specific kind of cold misery that you'd rather avoid. The finger's width of shutter gap lets in a thread of night air. You can feel it when you position yourself near the window. A thin, cold presence, barely perceptible, just enough. You lie in the dark and breathe it. And then there is the sound. This is the thing about London nights in the dark of the year that you don't expect and that nobody prepares you for. The sound is different in winter. Not quieter. London is never quiet. But different in texture, in character. The cold air carries sound differently. You can hear things at a greater distance. The church bells, which in summer are sometimes swallowed by the bustle, come through clearly on cold nights, each one distinct, each from its own direction. A bell to the north, low and steady. That's St. Giles Cripplegate, well outside the city wall. A bell that in summer you might not hear from Cheapside. A bell to the east, higher pitched. That's All Hallows barking near the tower, marking the hour in a voice that carries differently from the others. And St. Mary le Bow close enough that on still nights you can hear individual strikes clearly. The famous bell, the Bow Bell, the bell that is said to mark the true boundaries of London itself. Born within the sound of Bow Bells, that's the phrase. That's what it means to be a true Londoner. You weren't born within the sound of these bells. You were born in Suffolk, in a village where the church bell was smaller and gentler and didn't carry quite so far. You didn't grow up with Bow Bells, but you're going to sleep with them every night. That must count for something. Joan develops her winter cough in November, right on schedule. She warned you about this in October. I cough in winter, have done for years, don't make a fuss about it. And now it's arrived. A deep, productive cough that interrupts her sleep and yours, and is worst in the mornings before the room has warmed. You make her the ginger infusion that you've learned helps. Joan doesn't ask for it. She doesn't need to. You just make it and set it by her bed in the evenings, and she drinks it without commenting on it, which is Joan's version of thank you. The ginger comes from the spice merchant 2 streets over, and it costs more than you'd like, but less than the alternative, which is Joan's cough getting worse until it settles into her chest properly and takes weeks to shift. You've seen this happen to people. You've seen a bad winter cough become something that stays until spring, and sometimes longer. The smell of ginger in the kitchen in November is one of those smells that will stay with you. Not unpleasant at all, warm and sharp and particular. The smell of winter in this kitchen, the smell of getting through. Years from now, in a different place, if you smell ginger, something in you will go back to this kitchen, and this November, and Joan sitting on her bed drinking the infusion in the mornings, neither of you talking, the city waking up around you, the day beginning its demands. The darkness of the solstice weeks in December is the most complete darkness of the year. When the sun sets at 3:30 in the afternoon, and it does in London in December, the light going early and going fast, the sky shifting from cold blue to purple to black before you finish the afternoon's work, the candles and the fire become the whole world. Everything inside the circle of light exists. Everything outside it, which is most of the house and all of the street, is negotiated by memory and touch. You notice, in December, that the household moves differently. Not more slowly, the work is the same, but more carefully. People test the stairs before trusting them. People announce themselves when they move through darkened rooms. There's a heightened attention to where things are, to the placement of every object, because in this darkness reaching for something and finding it not there means reaching into black and finding nothing, and that particular small failure has a texture to it, a brief flicker of something adjacent to fear that you get used to but don't stop noticing. The candles are more precious in December. The tallow in the household stores needs to last through the winter and into the spring. Dame Alice's candle inventory happens twice in December, a careful count of what remains, what will be needed, what can be cut back on if necessary. The servants' room continues at 1 candle per person per night. This allowance doesn't change, but there's an awareness around it, a collective understanding that these candles are finite and the dark is long. And yet, and this is the thing you didn't expect, the thing you have to be honest about, December is not entirely bleak. There's something about the way the dark pulls people together. The way a house occupied by a family and their servants in December becomes a single warm thing, all the warmth generated by bodies and fire concentrated against the cold outside. The way supper in the kitchen in December smells and sounds and feels different from supper in September. More necessary, more satisfying, more earned. The pottage is thicker in December. Joan adds more barley to it when the weather is really cold, thickens it until it's closer to porridge than soup, and you eat it standing at the kitchen table sometimes, because the table is closer to the fire than the stools are, and you'd rather be warm than comfortable. The bread, which you've been helping to bake for several months now, Joan has been teaching you, not formally, just by including you in the process, letting you learn by proximity. The bread in December smells different. Something about the cold air, Joan says. Something about the way yeast behaves in cold. You don't know the science of it. You just know the smell. Christmas comes and the household marks it with more food than usual. A goose that Joan spends 3 days preparing. A dish of dried fruit and spices that Dame Alice makes herself from a receipt she keeps in a little book in the solar. The family goes to the Christmas Mass and comes back pink-cheeked and cold. The house smells of the goose for 2 days afterward, a smell that permeates the wood and the rushes and the plaster and doesn't entirely leave for a week. You eat well at Christmas. This is the one time of year when the distinction between family table and servants' table blurs slightly, not disappears, but softens. There is enough of everything that there's no need to be strict about who gets what. You eat goose. You eat the remains of the sweet dish. You eat until you're full, which is a particular satisfaction that is different from being merely not hungry, more specific, more physical. Old Walter, who is generally a quiet presence in the household, competent, reliable, barely noticeable unless you specifically look for him, becomes unexpectedly jovial at Christmas. He has a story about a Christmas in his youth when he was working at a much grander household than this one, and the cook got drunk and burned the main course entirely, and they had to improvise a feast from the kitchen stores. He tells this story at Christmas supper, and it's genuinely funny, and Joan laughs at it, which you've never seen Joan do properly before, and Dame Alice permits herself a smile that suggests she's heard it before but doesn't mind hearing it again. These are the small warmths, the human warmths underneath the cold and the smoke and the dark, the ways a household of people who are together by circumstance rather than choice makes something that functions, on the right evenings, almost like a family. Not quite, but almost. In February you turn 16. Nobody knows this except you and Thomas, who comes across the river on a Sunday and brings you a pair of ribbons from a haberdasher in Suffolk. 2 strips of bright blue silk, finer than anything you own, impractical and lovely. You thank him, and he looks pleased with himself in a way that men look when they've given a gift that worked. You don't mention your birthday to anyone in the household. There's no expectation that you would. Birthdays in 1555 are not the occasions they become later. You know when you were born, St. Bridget's Day, 2nd of February, which some people also call Candlemas, the feast of the purification of the Virgin, but the day passes in the house as Tuesday passes, full of its usual work, but you know. And in the evening, in the attic room, when the others are asleep, you lie on your pallet and hold the knowledge of it quietly. 16 years old, in London, alive and housed and employed and learning, day by day, the particular shape of this life. Your mother, when she sent you away with Thomas and the priest's letter, was 25 years old. She had been in Wickham Market her whole life. She had never been to London. She asked you once before you left. You were sitting at the kitchen table in the house in Suffolk the last morning, the morning of the departure. She asked you if you were afraid. You told her no. You were lying, of course, but it was a useful lie, a necessary one. You wonder if she knew. She probably knew. You fall asleep thinking about the kitchen table in Wickham Market and the way the light came through the window in the morning there, a different light from London light, more open, less filtered by the smoke, and the particular silence around it that you can almost reconstruct in your mind, though it gets harder every month. Spring again, April, the light comes back, and with the light, a change in the quality of the evenings that is very specific and very real. The evenings are longer now, the tallow candles are lit later. You have an hour after supper that you didn't have in February, an hour of genuine daylight in which the world outside the house is visible and the shutters can be open without letting in cold. You go out in this hour sometimes, just walking, through Cheapside down to the river, back through the smaller streets that run parallel. You've learned the city's geography well enough now that you can navigate it without counting streets, without consulting landmarks, just by the feel of which direction is which, the way you might navigate the inside of the house in the dark. The city in April is different. Not just lighter, different in mood, in texture. The vendors are louder. The people on the street are more relaxed, moving less urgently, some of them actually stopping to talk rather than conducting all their conversations in motion. The trees in the gardens of the wealthier houses, or you can see them over the walls, are budding. The river smells less rank than it will in summer. The sky, on the right evenings, goes a particular shade of gold over the western rooftops that you've come to think of as April's gift to London. The colour that makes the timber and the plaster of the houses glow warm for 20 minutes before the sun goes down. On one of these April evenings, walking back along a street south of Cheapside, you pass a house where someone is playing a lute inside. You can hear it through the closed window, a slow, clear melody, something you half recognise but can't name, played with real skill, each note clean and separate and hanging in the cool April air for a moment before the next one arrives. You stop walking, you stand in the street and listen. 2 people walk past you and don't notice you've stopped. The music continues. 4 bars, 8. Whoever is playing doesn't know you're there, doesn't know they're giving you this. They're just playing in a room, for themselves or for their family or for no one in particular. You stand there until the melody ends and silence returns to the window. Then you walk back to Cheapside and go inside. That evening in the kitchen you try to describe the music to Joan. You can't remember the tune well enough to hum it. You never had a musical education, but you remember the feeling of it, the way it stopped you in the street. Joan listens to this with an expression you've come to recognise as her thoughtful expression, the one where she's genuinely considering what you've said. Music does that, she says after a moment. Stops you when you're not expecting it. Does it happen to you? Sometimes. She adds wood to the fire, a practised motion, without looking at what her hands are doing. Less often now than when I was your age. Things stop surprising you after a while. Does that bother you? She considers this genuinely. No, she says at last. It means you know the world well enough. The things that surprised you at 15 aren't surprising anymore because you understand them. That's knowledge, not loss. A pause. The surprises you get later, those are better ones, more specific to who you've become. You sit with this for a while. What surprises you now, you ask. She almost smiles. People, she says. Still, after all this time, the things people decide to do and not do, that still surprises me. She goes back to her work and the conversation is over, but you remember it. You'll remember it for a long time in the way you remember the things that arrive at the right moment, that land on a question you were already carrying. And now the night, one final time. This particular night. This September night of your second year in London. The market today went well. You found the particular dried rosemary Joan wanted at the price she wanted, and you found good onions, and you negotiated the price of a small bundle of kindling down from 3 halfpennies to 2, and felt the small, solid satisfaction of that. The kitchen fire burned clean all day. The supper was good, a dish of pike with sauce that Joan has been perfecting for a week, and bread you baked yourself without supervision for the first time, and it came out right. Master Aldgate sold a large quantity of broadcloth to a man who came in from Hertfordshire specifically for it, and came through the kitchen in the late afternoon in a mood that was as close to cheerful as he gets, and told Joan the fish smelled excellent. High praise. Little Alice turned 12 last week and announced it to the household with the confidence of a child who has just acquired a round number and intends to use it. She is getting taller, Alice. She is getting her own opinions about things, which is both impressive and occasionally inconvenient. The household is safe. The shop is locked. The fire in the hall is banked. The water barrel in the kitchen is full. You climb the stairs. Joan is already in the room, her evening routine in progress, her grey-brown braid coming down, her expression the focused neutrality of someone at the end of a long day who has no more to give to the world and is preparing to stop giving. Alice is asleep. You close the door. You take down your hair. You fold your things. You unfold the palette. The tallow candle burns on its shelf, casting its familiar warm circle, the amber-yellow light that has been the light of every evening in this room for 2 years now, the light of your life here. Outside, the watchman calls 9 o'clock. All is well. Joan closes her book, blows out a candle. "Good night," she says. "Good night, Joan." And the dark that is not the dark you knew in Suffolk. Not the country dark, which is wide and roofless and full of owl sounds and the smell of fields. This is a city dark, enclosed, warmish, smelling of wood smoke and tallow and the wool blanket and 5 people who have been working all day in the service of a merchant household on Cheapside. This is your dark now. You know it the way you know the stairs by touch. The sounds come up from the street. The watchman moving on, the distant clop of a horse somewhere, the tavern noise from a street over, its particular quality, the laughter and the singing and the thump of a table. That means it's full and it's an ordinary evening and nobody's in trouble. The city at 9 o'clock in September, 1556. Queen Mary on the throne, the burning still happening, though you've learned not to think about them directly, to let the knowledge of them sit in the background of your daily life the way the smoke sits in the background of your breathing, present, unavoidable, not directly confronted. The fire in the hall below will hold until 2. At 2 you'll go down and add the logs, in the dark, in the quiet, in the hall that belongs briefly to no one and to you. The embers are bright enough to see by. The logs will go on crossing, the way Joan showed you. The fire will catch. You'll stand for a moment and watch it, and the city will be quiet around you, and the house will be asleep, and the night will be almost peaceful. Almost. And then you'll go back upstairs, and the second sleep will take you to morning. This is what it felt like to be alive in this room, in this city, in this time. Not heroic, not dramatic mostly, not the kind of life that gets written down, not by the people live in it. Just days, just evenings, just the fire and the dark and the smoke and the careful navigation of a world that is enormous and complex and mostly indifferent to whether you specifically succeed or fail, but which you are learning piece by piece to walk through with your eyes open. The city changes in the centuries after this. The smoke gets worse before it gets better. The dark gets solved and then becomes a choice. The fires in the hearths become radiators, become electric warmth, become underfloor heating that you'd have to explain to Joan 4 times before she believed it was real. The plague goes. The Queen goes. Mary will die in 1558, barely 3 years from now, and be replaced by her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth, and the burnings will end, and the country will change again in the way it has been changing, and will keep changing. The city stays. People still live in these streets, still climb these stairs, still tend fires in the small hours of cold mornings, still listen to the city through whatever crack exists in the wall against the night, still feel the dark at the end of a long day as something not to fear but to welcome. The body's reward, the night's offering, the long quiet hours between the last thing and the first thing, still sleep in 2 parts, if they let themselves, still wake in the middle of the night to thoughts that are clearer in the dark than they are by day, still breathe, let the dark take you, let the smoke settle, let the fire keep its watch downstairs, let the watchman call his hours, let the city do what it has been doing since before you were born, and will keep doing long after you're gone. You've earned your rest. The straw holds you. The blanket holds you. The dark holds you. The second sleep is waiting, the way it always waits, patient and absolute and ready. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You're exactly where you are. And that is enough. The last thing you hear is St. Mary Le Beau striking somewhere beyond the shutter, counting, going quiet. And then nothing, just rest, just the long, slow drift. There is something you've never told anyone about the fire tending. In the in-between waking, in that private middle-of-the-night hour, standing in the hall with the fresh logs on the embers and the flames beginning, you sometimes don't go straight back upstairs. You sit on the edge of the hearth instead, on the flat stone that runs along the base, the stone that is warm from the fire and stays warm even when the fire is down to its bones. You sit there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, sometimes longer. You're not doing anything. That's the thing. You're just sitting in the firelight in a sleeping house at 2 in the morning, and you're not doing anything at all. This is not something you had before you came to London. In Wickham Market there was no hour in the night that was yours. The night was sleep, or it was work, or it was someone else's need. There was no room in it for just sitting. Here, in this hall, in this particular dark, there is. The fire gives its light in the specific way firelight is different from all other light. Not steady, not the fixed illumination of a candle or a lamp, but moving, breathing, responsive to currents in the air you can't even feel, the light going and coming and going again, the shadows of the room dancing in their slow, enormous way. The carved edge of the trestle table appears and disappears. The embroidered cushion on Dame Alice's chair, visible from here at the end of the hall, its blue and red pattern emerging from shadow and retreating, exists and doesn't exist. The room is alive with this moving dark, and you are sitting in the middle of it. Sometimes you think about Wickham Market, the house, your parents, your father's tannery with its vats and its smell that everyone in the village has so thoroughly absorbed that they barely notice it anymore. Your mother at the kitchen table in the morning, her hands that are always doing something. Sometimes you don't think about anything, you just sit. You've come to understand that this is a thing you need, not something you chose to need, just something that's true about you, discovered in this particular city, in this particular circumstance. You need the quiet. You need the 10 minutes of nobody wanting anything from you and nothing pressing in. You get it at 2 a.m. in a merchant's hall on Cheapside, which is perhaps not where anyone would have planned for this need to be met, but here you are. The fire burns. The city is quiet. You're the only person awake in the house. Then you go upstairs. Let me tell you about the smells of the year in sequence, because they change and the changes matter. September smells of the beginning of the coal season. London starts shifting from wood to coal in September as the weather turns, and the coal smoke has a different quality from wood smoke, sharper and more mineral, less organic. It takes getting used to this particular smell, this particular assault on the lungs. Coal burning is the future of London's warmth, and also, though nobody knows it yet, the long catastrophe of London's air. October smells of preserving. Joan spends 2 weeks in October putting up everything that can be put up for the winter. Dried herbs, pickled vegetables, salted meat. The kitchen in October smells of vinegar and brine, and the sharp sweetness of fruit that's been cooked into jam. These smells are good smells, productive smells, the smell of preparation, of a household taking care of itself. November smells of cold. This sounds wrong. Coal doesn't have a smell, but it does. The cold air coming in through the shutter gap at night has a mineral, vacant quality. The smell of something that contains nothing organic, nothing alive. And into this cold air the house exhales its warmth and its smoke and its human occupation. And the combination of winter cold and inhabited warmth is a specific smell that you associate completely with November in this room. December smells of the goose and the spices, and the particular tension of a household waiting for Christmas. Dame Alice becomes slightly anxious in December, a different kind of busy, more organised and more critical, checking and rechecking the stores. The goose, the candles stockpiled for Christmas, the quality of the flour. January smells of the ice, the water frozen in the barrel, the frost on the cobbles when you go to the conduit in the morning, the way the cold air has somehow extracted all the usual London smells and left something cleaner, emptier, a city briefly stripped of its usual self by weather. February smells of waiting. There's no other way to describe it. The smell of February in a cold room in London is the smell of endurance. of the long grey middle of winter where Christmas is behind you and spring is theoretically coming, but you cannot believe in it yet with your body, only with your mind. March smells of mud, and then, eventually, of green. The mud first, the thaw turning the streets from frozen to sodden, the cobbles reappearing from under layers of compacted winter filth, everything going soft and slightly rank in a way that actually represents improvement. Then, later, in the last weeks, the smell of green things beginning. The smell that arrived that morning at the conduit, the one that made you stop and breathe, the one that reached you from somewhere east and reminded you of Wickham Market. April smells of possibility. This is too vague, too literary. Joan would roll her eyes at it. But it's accurate. There's something in April air in London that loosens you, that makes the mornings feel less like endurance and more like beginning. It's the light, partly. The light coming back, the evenings getting longer, the candles getting lit later. But it's also the smell. The city warming up, the Thames not quite stinking yet, the trees visible over the garden walls budding into the first green. May smells of everything at once. The full noise of summer commerce beginning, the markets expanding, the streets full, the vendors multiplying, and underneath it all, flowers. Some of the wealthier houses have gardens, and the flowers in those gardens, the roses that come in May, the lavender and rosemary that are everywhere in kitchen gardens, add something to the general London murk that is unexpected and briefly beautiful. You are learning the year in the city, which is different from the year in the country in specific teachable ways. The year in the city is defined by fuel costs and market prices, and the diseases that circulate through particular seasons, and the religious calendar that Dame Alice and Master Aldgate observe with consistent though not excessive care. The year in the country was defined by the land and the animals and the weather, and the physical demands of working with both. You know both years now. Incompletely. You'll never know either one perfectly, but both. That seems worth something. In March of your second spring, you do something you've been thinking about since autumn. You go up to Ludgate Hill on a Sunday afternoon to see if Joan was right about the view. It's not far, a mile or so west of Cheapside. The hill rising up towards St. Paul's, which sits at its top like something that has decided it belongs there and is waiting for the city to agree. You go alone, which is slightly irregular for a young woman in London in 1556, but it's broad daylight and it's a Sunday, and you've been navigating this city for nearly 2 years and you trust your feet. The hill rises gradually. You don't notice the incline in your daily movement around the city. London doesn't feel like it has hills from inside it. But climbing towards St. Paul's, you feel it in the back of your calves, the slight additional effort. At the top, at the churchyard wall, you stop. The wind today is from the east. Joan was right. You can see it, properly see it. The smoke from the city's chimneys is blowing west today, away from you, and the air where you're standing has that quality Joan described. Clean, almost. Cleaner than anything you've breathed in this city for nearly 2 years. The city spreads out below you to the south and east, all the way down to the river, all the way along to the tower, and beyond the river you can see Southwark and the buildings of Bankside, and further still the green hills of Surrey rising blue in the distance. St. Paul's is above you and behind you, its enormous bulk blocking the sky, its spire, the tallest thing you've ever stood close to, the tallest structure in England, going up and up until you have to tip your head back to find the top, and even then the top is just a point against the sky, unimaginable from down here. The stone of it is up close a darker grey than it looks from a distance, the colour of weathered things, of great age, of a building that has been standing since before there were people in England who kept written records, though the current building is newer than that, the Norman structure rebuilt and rebuilt over centuries. People were standing on this hill 1,000 years ago, looking out at whatever London was then, smaller, slower, less smoking. They looked out and thought whatever they thought, and went back to their lives, and the lives are gone, but the hill is still here and London is still here, changed beyond recognition, and somehow the same thing. You stand there for a long time. The cold March wind comes from the east, clean and salt-scented, smelling of the sea somewhere far away, of the Thames estuary, of open water. It carries nothing from London, nothing from 10,000 chimneys, nothing from the market or the tanneries or the privies, just air. You breathe it. You breathe it until your lungs feel like they've been washed. Then you go back down the hill and back along the familiar streets to Cheapside, and the familiar smell of your city, your smoke, your home, and the night. Always the night. The night is the thing. Not just the bad parts of it. Not just the dark and the cold and the smoke and the unavoidable bodily inconveniences of 5 people in a small room. The night is also the fire at 2 a.m, the second sleep carrying you to morning. The city's changed music. Quieter, stranger. More honest in some way than the daytime performance. Joan told you something in the spring that you've been thinking about ever since. You'd asked her, on one of those evenings when she was talking, one of those evenings when the kitchen fire was low and the work was done and the question arrived without planning, what she thought about when she was awake in the night. She'd been quiet for a moment, and you'd expected her to deflect it, to say she didn't know or that she slept straight through. But she didn't. The dead, she said. Simple as that. Not in a bad way, not afraid of them. Just, they come to mind. My husband. My mother. A woman I worked with in the first house, a good woman, died of a fever in her 3rd year of marriage. A pause. The night is when you have room for them. During the day there's too much else. You think about this a lot in the small dark hours. You're 15, then 16. You don't have many dead yet, but the principle seems right. The night is when you have room for things that don't fit in the day. Not just the dead, but the complicated, the unresolved, the things you carry without knowing you're carrying them. At 2 a.m. in the hall, with the fire going and the city quiet, there is room for everything you're becoming, for everything you've left behind, for the question of what you believe and what you're willing to say out loud, for the girl from Wickham Market and the girl from London, who are the same person and increasingly the same person. Room for all of it. And then the fire is good, and you go upstairs, and the second sleep takes over, and in the morning the bells and the vendors and the city's enormous, insatiable day begins again. That's the loop of it. That's the shape of the year. Day and fire and dark. Fire and dark and sleep. Sleep and bells and morning. Over and over, the same and different. The way the city is always the same city, and always something you haven't seen before. You are learning the loop. You're becoming part of it. That's enough. That's everything. Let the fire do its work. Let the dark be what the dark is. Let the city breathe around you. Let rest come the way it always comes. In the end, to everyone who has done their work and banked their fire and found their way home through whatever streets the day required. The straw pallet, the rough blanket, the finger's width of cold air, the distant bells counting hours you're too tired to hear. Good night.